America, land of the immigrants. Immigration is the act of moving from one country to another country to live permanently. Immigrants have been an integral part of American history for as long as American history has existed. In fact, America was founded by immigrants. Immigrants have played a crucial role in the development of America's culture and diversity, yet they still face many trials and tribulations that other residents of America do not. Beginning in the 1880s, when the government began to initiate restrictions on immigrations entering America with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and lasting through the 1920s when many more laws were established to limit immigration, this period in history was full of conflicts and challenges designed to chase away foreigners and preserve American homogeneity. The time period between 1880 and the 1920s was a period of rapid industrialization and urbanization in America. During this time frame, America became home to more than 20 million immigrants. Immigrants flocked to America in search of a higher standard of living and new economic opportunities, as well as to escape oppression from their home countries. Beginning in the 1890s, a large majority of the arrivals originated from Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe, and in that decade alone, approximately 600,000 Italians alone migrated to America, and by 1920, more than 4 million had entered the U.S. Between 1880 and 1920, more than 2 million Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe had also entered the U.S. to escape religious persecution. However, with the outbreak of World War I in 1914, America's fear for national security grew due to the influx of war refugees, and preemptive measures were taken by Congress to ensure the safety of the U.S. and its citizens. In addition to growing concerns over national security and the establishment of new laws, the augmentation of the number of immigrants and minorities in America sparked a renewed sense of nativism among native-born Americans who feared they were losing their home to undesirable newcomers. In 1917, the Literacy Act, enforced by Congress, paved the way for one of the most restrictive acts that had to do with immigrants. This act was the first widely restrictive law against immigrants entering the U.S. It required foreigners 16 years of age and older seeking entrance to pass a literacy test, which demonstrated basic reading and writing skills. In addition to literacy tests, the Act of 1917 also increased the tax paid by immigrants upon arrival and allowed immigration officials to exercise more discretion in making decisions over whom to exclude. This act also denied entrance to any immigrants from the Asian Barred Zone. This zone excluded Japan and the Philippines, as well as China. However, Chinese immigrants were already banned due to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was the first ever federal law that systematically restricted immigration into the U.S. The government didn't feel that this act alone was enough to keep immigrants out of the U.S., and as a result, Congress implemented the Immigration Act of 1924. The Immigration Act of 1924, or the Johnson-Reed Act, contained a component which set a national origins quota. This limited the number of immigrants allowed entry into the United States. The act was signed by President Calvin Coolidge on May 24, 1924. The Immigration Act of 1924 restricted the number of immigrants from a country to 2% of the number of residents from that same country living in the United States, and by 1927 added provisions to limit total immigration to only 150,000 yearly. The 1924 Immigration Act also included a provision that denied any alien who by virtue of race or nationality was ineligible for citizenship entry into the U.S., which meant that even Asians who were previously allowed entry into the U.S., the Japanese in particular, would no longer be admitted into the States. Moreover, this law also established a consular-based immigration system, which required immigrants to have a visa issued by an American consular officer abroad before immigrating to the U.S. This system is still used today. The Immigration Act of 1924 stemmed from the Emergency Quota Act implemented in 1921, which limited immigration from any country to 3% the number of residents originating in that country living in the United States. The Emergency Quota Act alone resulted in a decrease of immigration of almost 500,000 fewer people between 1920 and 1922. In addition to conflicts imposed by laws, immigrants also faced a plethora of social challenges that were spurred on by xenophobic attitudes expressed by native-born Americans who were not accepting of the foreigners. Sponsors of the Immigration Act of 1924 believed that certain groups, being British, Germans, and Scandinavians in particular, were racially superior to other people of different ethnic backgrounds. Consequently, these prejudiced Americans favored the mostly fair-skinned and Protestant immigrants who were found in the old wave of immigrants over the darker-complected, mostly Catholic or Jewish immigrants who came in the new wave of immigrants, and they believed that they should be allowed entrance into the U.S. in greater numbers. As a result, these new wave immigrants were often isolated from the rest of America, and due to this, they often formed their own small ethnic neighborhoods, which were excluded from the rest of American society. Furthermore, Americans feared the security of their places of work and worried that immigrants would steal their jobs, thus leaving them unemployed. Many Americans also felt that these foreigners were too different to assimilate into American life and were hesitant in accepting the new culture and beliefs brought by immigrants from their homelands. These widespread fears, as well as the laws implemented by the American government, are what set the basic foundation for the conflicts which immigrants faced and still face to this day. However, in 1943, immigrants began to see a slightly more promising future with the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, thus lifting the ban on all Chinese immigrants from entering the U.S. Then on October 3, 1965, Congress passed the Immigration and Nationalities Act of 1965, also known as the Hart-Celler Act. This act abolished all previous acts established in the 1920s that restricted immigration based on nationality. The Hart-Celler Act effectively changed the way quotas on immigrants were allocated by ending the national origins formula. This act marked a change from past policies established in the 1920s and therefore removed racial and national barriers, thus significantly altering the demographic mix of the U.S. as well as improving many of the challenges immigrants faced. Though improvements have been made regarding the tough circumstances immigrants in America find themselves in, as a country, America still has a long road ahead of it until it can be guaranteed that immigrants will be given the equal and fair opportunities that they deserve.